Hi, I'm Panda, and today we are talking about whether India has a Muslim problem. Let's find out. Now, before we go on to talk about Islam, we have to start talking about religion as a whole. Because you see, I am an atheist. I don't believe in any religion whatsoever. A recent argument with an online troll who insisted that he drew his moral beliefs from the Vedas, and atheists like me did not have a sense of morality and could justify murder, incest, or any of those, really deplorable acts, made me think about the religion that I was born into. See, I was born into a Hindu Brahmin family in Orissa. My father was an Air Force officer, and my grandfather was a professor of English. Growing up, religion was not taught to me explicitly, which means that while my grandmother did pray every day, had a puja ghar in her kitchen, I was never really told to pray or adhere to any religious practices as such. Festivals in the house meant a lot of sweets, a lot of pitha as we call it, and that's that. The idea of God was not really preached to me, but rather imparted as bits of knowledge, as something that exists. Like this is what we believe in. There are the three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwar, each carrying out a different purpose in the universe. The whole bit about reincarnation and moksha was never really drilled into me. It was never something that drove my existence. This meant that my religious belief or disbelief developed more or less on its own. Studying science in school, it was pretty clear right from the beginning that the stories about religion that we heard and saw in television or read in books were just that, stories. When I used to hear Puranic stories about people praying to Shiva and getting boons, getting their prayers answered, I thought maybe, chanting Om Namah Shivaya will get me my wishes. And nobody in my family explicitly told me that, oh, this is a story, this does not happen in real life. But I grew up. I realized that those are a part of our mythology. People believe in God because it brings them a sense of belonging, a sense of peace, but none of it is really true. And the more I learned science, the more and more it became evident that religion was dated and could be directly negated by science. That's why I am an atheist. But that does not mean I do not have a sense of morality. I keep telling people that morality has nothing to do with religion. A lot of people think, especially religions like Christianity, think the fear of God is what drives their morality. But that's not how it is. Human beings have a conscience. Human beings have an idea of what's right and what's wrong. I theorize that to explain right and wrong to a child, we do not really need the concept of a God. While my wife often argues with me, telling me that all ideas of morality come from religion one way or the other. She essentially tells me that even the morality that was taught to me by my family came from whatever was taught to them through the Hindu faith. While that might be true, I do not think being an atheist means you'll justify murder, means you'll justify stealing. You see, the question of who created us is as old as civilization itself. But religions came later. Religions are clearly a way of consolidating power. We can see that in practice. Religion was a way of keeping society together, subjugating people and keeping them in line. We know this. But because it also very well integrates the idea of a creator, it makes people believing in it fanatical to a degree which is unprecedented. Recently, I made some videos which try to bust some myth relating to various topics like the caste system and reality of Mahabharata and Ramayana. A lot of people came up with a lot of arguments which defend ideas which are clearly against science. And when I argued with these people, I realized something very important, that you cannot win these arguments. You see, fact versus faith this argument will always be tipped towards faith, because faith is illogical, whereas fact needs proving. In the topic of caste and its origins, I had multiple arguments with people where I showed them that even old scriptures mention the caste system, mention a birth-based caste discrimination. But even after I quoted the scripture and brought out passages that proved my point, the argument was refuted by the person opposite me, saying, "Oh, you have read a wrong version of the scripture, or you have read the English translation, not the Sanskrit original." And that's that. They found a way to discredit my opinion and just go on believing what they did. That's how it goes. Now, science effectively disproves all religion. How do we know this? Now, for a change, let me take the example of Judeo-Christian religions to prove my point. So, Bible was written around 2000 years ago. Quran came to existence around 1400 years ago. Jewish Torah is probably older than the Bible by, say, another 1000, 2000 years. I'm not sure about these numbers. So these books, while they all claim to be the word of God, are really limited by the knowledge of their times. The information, the social sensibilities are all from the time that these books were composed. And new scientific discovery constantly proves the points which are asserted in these books wrong. Let's start with a very popular example of Galileo discovering that Earth and other planets go around the sun. Till that point, the Christian belief was that all heavenly bodies revolve around the Earth, including sun and other planets and stars. So rigid was that belief that the church persecuted Galileo. And not until 1822, the burden of proof was so much that they had to concede that yes, Galileo was right. Finally, around the year 2000, did the Catholic Church apologize for how they treated Galileo. Let's also take the argument of how women are written about in all of these scriptures, in all of these holy books, be it Quran, be it Bible, the Old Testament especially. They all write about women as being inferior to men. Now, with the feminist movement that we have seen in the last 300 years or so, and with the state of women in the society today, we know that the ideas propagated in these religions do not hold up. Then there is the basic idea of time, the basic history of humanity as told in these books, in books like Bible and Quran and Torah, where they talk about God making earth in a certain number of days. But we have already found fossils which are millions of years old, dinosaurs which are nowhere mentioned in the Bible and Quran because they could not have been, because these are all religions that were started by people, by humans, and dinosaurs predate humans. You'll come across a lot of videos on the internet where they try to counter this by saying, oh, God made Adam in one day and Adam was a grown-up on the second day. So was it one day or was it a few years? Or somebody else saying God created the world with a certain age, as in it was already a certain billion years old or a 1,000,000,000 years old when God created it. And he put fossils and whatnot in the earth for humans to find. That argument is good when you want to win an online argument, but does it really hold up? See, the fact is, scientific discoveries disprove religion, every one of them. Recently, a lot of people have been arguing with me on the internet about how ancient Hindus had a better understanding of science. Hinduism is based on scientific advancement, and all of those ideas do not hold up. You see, I'm not saying that ancient Hindus did not have an idea of science, but while their ideas might have been very advanced for that time, they were nowhere close to the scientific advancement that exists today. You have conspiracy theorists indicating that, oh, could these old temples have been made with modern instrument, or could aliens have helped us make this? There's no evidence that points towards those things. We invented zero, great, and that was a great invention for that time. Some old sage talked about Gurutva Akarshan, good, but when we take a leap from that to saying that, oh, we had invented flight way before because Ramayana describes flying chariots, well, how do you get from that point to that point? Just because it's the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, we completely ignore the possibility of it being fiction. People saw birds flying, so they thought, oh, what if we could fly? Greek and Roman mythology have the idea of Icarus. Do you think Icarus happened? That is that simple argument, that simple logic that religious people just ignore. Now all the holy books, including the Hindu scriptures, were written at a time when they had very little scientific knowledge. And that reflects in how they are written. We have been finding scientific evidence that negates all those ideas, be it the Big Bang theory, the theory of evolution. These are all ideas that stand polar opposite to the ideas that were propagated in the religious books. But people still, even with the scientific knowledge being available, choose to believe in these books. Most Christians do not believe in theory of evolution, even though fossils and other information is given to them. Most Muslims do not believe in anything other than Islam. They think science is just fiction, which is aimed at corrupting people. Most Hindus will not accept logic that goes against their beliefs. So what makes these books inspire so much faith? It's the conditioning. You see, all of these books in all the communities in the world are being followed for generations. Right from the day a child is born, he or she is told that this is how it is, this is what we believe in. What religion you're born into is a matter of chance. But each religion tells you that this is the truth. There is a God. This is what the God expects from us. This is how we should live our lives if we are to make the God happy. There's the idea of heaven and hell, which is basically reward and punishment. Now, cause and effect is a scientific reality, but religion mythicizes it, gives people a hope of a great life after death, to some a liberation from the cycle of life and death, like in Hinduism. All of these ideas are essentially carrots and sticks meant to keep people in line. Another huge impact religion has on us is that it clouds our perspective. We don't see people as people anymore. We see them as Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and anything other than what we are. We manage to dehumanize their identity. Now, I often talk about the Hindu religion and the social problems that exist in the religion in India today, because that's relevant to the society we live in. But people keep telling me, oh, why don't you talk about Islam? Why don't you talk about the problems with Islam? That's because we have made Islam public enemy number one. So you know what? Let's talk about Islam. People in India often talk shit about Islam without knowing much about it. The fact that the word Allah is basically Arabic for God, and it refers to the same God that is referred to in the Bible, is something not a lot of people know about. Also, the fact that most of the ideas within the Quran are derivative from the ideas in the Bible. Many of the stories are similar. The Quran also acknowledges Jesus Christ, just that it considers Jesus Christ a messenger, just like Prophet Muhammad, rather than Son of God. Now, what Islam did was codify the ideas from the Bible and make them way more rigid and binding. Now, this was a religion that developed in the violent deserts of the Middle East. Now, the purpose of this religion was to consolidate power in the Middle East, and hence it had to be different. It had to learn and adapt Christianity, the Christian ideas or the Jewish ideas, and make them different so that more people would follow it and not follow whatever similar religion that they were following up to that point. So this meant incorporating harsher ways of faith. So while Christianity also said that if you don't believe in God and you indulge in idol worship, you will go to hell and you will not be allowed into the kingdom of heaven, Islam just went one step further, and it said the worshippers of Jesus would also be condemned to hell. Now, one more thing that Islam did was prohibit change of any kind to the Quran itself, which meant that Muslims ideally will not study the translated version of the Quran. They study Quran in its original Arabic. When there are arguments between Muslims and Christians, they often say there is only one Quran that we follow, but you have several versions of the Bible, because the Bible was translated to Latin, then Greek, from the original Hebrew, and then to English, and then to even other regional languages in which it is read and practiced today. But the Quran, even in the remotest part of the world, is read in Arabic. And it says that this is the only way to do it, making the faith of Islam very rigid and binding. And that starts the basic problem that Islam faces today: the bias of the world, the hatred of the world. You see, its inherent rigidity makes Muslims always stand out in any society. And we know anything that stands out will be discriminated against. Now, I cannot move ahead from this topic without mentioning the radicalization in Islam. A lot of people believe that radicalization is unique to Islam, but we know for a fact that it is not. Radicalization exists in all religions. But what makes Islam particularly prone to radicalization? Again, it is that rigidity we talked about earlier. Now, that rigidity means that people take the Quran very, very seriously. Now, every little thing that is written in the Quran or one of the later teachings of Muslim scholars is considered literal truth. And also the fact that Quran says this is the only law for you, for any devotee of Allah. Allah is the only way, which means no other law, especially the laws by men, would be considered by Muslims as the truth. They will not pray to any other god. From an Indian context, let's look at how this has manifested in India. Vande Mataram, our national song, literally means we worship our motherland. Now you'll see a lot of Muslims saying that they cannot say it because a Muslim technically is not allowed to worship anyone but Allah. Similarly, there's a lot of discussion about the Sharia law and the constitution. Now you ask a lot of Muslims and they'll say we only follow the Quran, that is our way of life, we do not hold the constitution above it. Now this irks a lot of people. But the fact is that in practice, it does not mean much. You see, a Muslim in India is subject to the same criminal laws as a Hindu or a person from any other religion. In the criminal law is already universal for everyone in India. But the personal laws for each religion are different. Now these were codified this way, you may say, to appease people from each religion. But Muslim personal laws do leave a lot of room for reform, especially gender-based reforms. Whereas such reforms have been widely addressed when it comes to the Hindu personal law. But coming back to radicalization, you see, radicalization is not just about religion alone. There's a lot of other things that go into radicalization, and one big aspect is politics. Like I mentioned earlier, religion is almost always about consolidating power. But then the radicalization in religion can be a reaction to certain things. Now, when I said radicalization in Islam is easy, that is because you can take the name of Allah, and if you manage to convince people that the cause that you're rallying them for is for Allah, their faith in their God is so strong that they'll follow you. For example, this we have seen in misguided people like Ajmal Kasab, who was so brainwashed that he killed so many people in Mumbai in 2008, many of whom were also Muslims. But he thought that he was doing the right thing, that he thought he was going to heaven because of the attacks that he had carried out, because somebody had managed to brainwash him. Now, when I'm saying this, I have to mention radicalization that is happening in India today. You know, the whole Hindu Khatre Mein Hai narrative that is designed to radicalize, or at the very least polarize, the Hindu sentiment. Now you're all smart enough to see who that polarization helps. Like I said, religion more often than not is about consolidating and keeping power. That's what some political parties are using it for. Radicalization, hence, can only be done by creating an enemy. How do you create an enemy? You scare them. You scare people into believing that somebody is the enemy. Now, the suicide bombers who attacked USA in 2001 believed that USA was the enemy. They had their own righteous reason to do what they were doing. Whether it was actually right or wrong is another question altogether. Now, we have also seen Christian radicalization in white countries in the form of mass shootings and formation of cults that have carried out extreme and criminal activities. We see radicalization in Hinduism leading to lynching of people and shootouts in trains, riots. But when you speak to any of these people who have carried out radical acts, they always think they are in the right. A troll came at me online saying, "This is why Muslims are hated everywhere in the world. Europe has a Muslim problem, India has a Muslim problem, Israel has a Muslim problem." Now, the us versus them narrative, which is more related to politics than it is to religion, differs in all of these countries that were mentioned. See, in India, the us versus them narrative exists because of history of Islam in India. Islam more or less came with Turkish invaders and the Mughals. The so-called Muslim problem in countries like France comes from their time of colonizing Muslim countries, and also a lot of racial discrimination that the immigrants face. Israel versus Palestine is a completely different conflict, but the uniting factor in the enemy in all of these cases is Islam. So we use all of those examples to hate Muslims in our country. In the current political scenario, rumors and misinformation plays a big role in propagating hate. In India, we have come up with so many conspiracy theories against the Muslims, be it love jihad, be it the idea of forced conversion, be it the faulty idea of population jihad. Time after time, data has shown that there is no real conspiracy there, be it the population levels, where the current government data tells you that the population growth has slowed down for Muslims as well as Hindus. Their levels of growth in population are not that much higher than Hindus. But people will still believe that Muslims are increasing their populations at a worrying rate so as to surpass us in population and rule the nation. Now, love jihad. Now, this word has been thrown around so much in current times, whereas if you actually care to investigate into the so-called cases of love jihad, you would find that very few of them are big conspiracies as they are made out to be. Forced conversion is another such point. Now, a lot of people will tell you that Mughals, forcefully converted Hindus. It's recorded in history that when the British came, 1/5 of the population was Muslim. And that population of Muslims actually increased during the British rule. And that simply tells us that the forced conversion theory is not right. Now, you would be curious to know why I often speak against religious disharmony when I have such a view about all the religions. You see, my opinion about religious harmony and how we need it more than anything else comes from a social responsibility point of view. You see, constant conflict between religions is not good for a society, and I do not need to give you any reason to prove that as well. Politicians will keep trying to paint an enemy for you. Politicians will keep telling you stories to make you hate Muslims, but you have to make an effort to change how you look at things. You cannot complain that Muslims are not as literate as Hindus while discriminating against Muslim children in school. You cannot complain about Muslims all living in ghettos while making it difficult for a Muslim to buy property or rent property in Hindu neighborhoods. You cannot complain about Muslims not thinking of Hindus as their brothers while putting out hateful ideas about Muslims on your social media. And lastly, you cannot talk about how rigid Islam is while becoming more and more rigid in your own religious beliefs. You see, that hypocrisy has to stop. For example, there was another guy arguing with me about the deplorable conditions of minorities in Bangladesh and Pakistan, especially Hindus. And in the same breath, he was justifying the persecution of Muslims in India because they were persecuting Hindus in other countries. Is that logical? If we behave like Muslims in other countries, do we have any moral ground left then to blame them? Why should we be the bigger person? That's a question that is asked often. You hear a lot of politicians say that India is secular only because the Hindus are secular. But you see, that is a flawed logic. Nobody stopped Hindus from being religious. Secular does not mean leaving your religion behind. Secular means tolerating all religions. So even a Muslim who will never consider your religion as the truth can be civil to you, can treat you well. And they do. And that is what secularism is all about. It is not about eliminating religion or assimilating religion.